bring in Michael Steele. He's a former spokesperson for then House Speaker John Boehner, knows exactly how those folks on Capitol Hill think. He was also a senior advisor to Jeb Bush in 2016. Panel's also here: Bill Kristol, Maria Teresa Kumar, Lonnie Chen. But Michael, I want to start with you. How would you characterize the mood behind the scenes and sort of on Capitol Hill there on that side of Pennsylvania with what's happening in Ohio 12 and just suddenly the Koch brothers feud with Trump? I get the sense that folks are suddenly going, wait a minute, this is the wrong time of the year for these fights to break open like this.
I would describe the mood as determined and resolute. Everyone knew this was going to be a very tough year. Everyone knew we were facing historic headwinds. Everyone knows that President Trump can tweet or say things that aren't always helpful at times that aren't always helpful. But if you look at Ohio 12, I think the polls are a lagging indicator. I think the president's visit is going to goose the support among Republicans in that district. And I think that your MSNBC colleague Chris Matthews did a tremendous service by getting O'Connor to admit what everyone knows, that he will vote for Nancy Pelosi for Speaker. And you're going to start seeing ads reminding the people of Ohio 12 about that today.
I noticed there's also an ad saying, is Mr. Balderson going to support Jim Jordan for Speaker? And being in Columbus, Ohio, the Ohio State, now they have multiple sports scandals right now when it comes to things, but having to do with Jim Jordan. I'm guessing that back forward. Let me ask you this. Are we learning now that actually, you know, the old axiom used to be when the political party that was in power, when they were in trouble, the goal was don't nationalize a race. We can run locally. Well, it's turned out that's not the truth. The only way for these races, for these Republicans to survive, it appears, is to nationalize it.
I think there's actually a kind of a disconnect here. I think that there are districts where you have a higher college-educated population, you have a more moderate electorate, places that have traditionally been battlegrounds, Curbello's seat in Florida, Kaufman in Colorado, where the president is not necessarily helpful, but those are places where the individual member has done a great job working their district, working their individual issues, making a connection with voters and their own brand and identity. It's the more generic Republican seats like this one, or Georgia 6, where the president himself is a huge asset.
The Koch brothers issue. Seems like a lot of uncomfortable Republicans on Capitol going, well, wait a minute. You guys, are you really going to fight this way? How serious do you take it?
I think it could be a real issue. I think the Koch network has done an extraordinary job expanding and promoting their vision for a better America. I think that many of their passionate positions are different than those of the president, and they're often in the places where the president disagrees with the rest of the Republican Party. The president is not, historically speaking, a Republican, and on areas like trade, he is sharply opposed by the bulk of the rest of the party.
Maria, I don't know. Which side are you on in the Trump-Koch feud?
It's really, really tough. I mean, it's tough only because the Koch brothers are doing a really... they literally are taking the Karl Rove playbook and siphoning off... we're looking into social justice issues, looking into Latino issues, looking into criminal justice reform, and going into these communities and saying, we don't need all those voters, we just need a couple of them. And so it's tough. And the fact that they're looking at investing in some Democratic races possibly, it's I think the Democrats themselves are kind of like, oh, shoot, what do we do next?
They don't know what to do with it either, right?
Really,
the Kochs are going, hey, we're interested in supporting. You're like,
do we want it?
Do we want it or not? Right?
Look, I mean, I've had my differences with the Kochs over the years. They're at the opposite end of the spectrum on foreign policy, for example. But they believe in certain things. They're free traders. They're free market people. They are pro-moderate liberal views on immigration, criminal justice reform. They've funded a huge amount of stuff on that. So they have their principles. They want to support people who agree with them. But what's striking, and I admire that. I think that's fine. What's striking is the Trump and Trump lackey response, which is not, okay, we disagree on some issues. We hope we can work together where possible.
I just gave you
What did the RNC, which has become...
Listen to this. I got to read Steve Bannon.
Right.
Listen to what Steve Bannon said about the Kochs. You were bringing this up. You take Koch money, it's going to be toxic. We are going to let people know that if you take Koch money, there's a punishment. If you take money from people who are against the president and are looking to put a knife in the back of the president, you are going to pay.
But Bannon...
Really?
But look at this. The RNC, the official Republican National Committee, which is supposed to speak for the Republican Party, not for one guy in the White House, attacked the Koch brothers and warned other donors about going down that path. Donors to the Republican Party, you cannot have your own views. You cannot choose to support more free trade Republicans as opposed to protectionist Republicans. What kind of party is this now? Is this pure Donald Trump cult of personality? That's what the RNC is now about?
Yeah, and it speaks to these fundamental fissures in the Republican Party. Some of them have been there for a while, but they're really breaking open now, whether it's on trade, trade, on immigration, on some of these issues where we've known this stuff exists. You know, the question is, how do you run in a competitive district? How do you run a race where you want to kind of forge your own pathway, but doing so puts you at odds with the president and the entire Republican apparatus? That's a big problem.
Michael Steele, I mean, look, there is a penalty for opposing the president. I guess that's what the RNC is trying to warn other donors. Is that why they took a shot at the Kochs?
Well, the president always puts a firm imprint on the RNC or the DNC, whichever party they're in. I think this is probably unwise. I think that a successful coalition, a successful Republican majority in the House and the Senate.
You always say these things in such an understated way, Michael. I think it's probably unwise. It's like, dude. I think the word unwise is an understatement, but go ahead.
I think that we need the support from everyone we can get across the spectrum to maintain the Republican majorities in the House and Senate, and that should be our highest priority this year, not internecine disagreements.
Maria, you would work with the Koch brothers on criminal justice reform, possibly on some immigration reform. I mean, are you comfortable look, you have your own interests and you have your own group that you lead. How are you comfortable with the Kochs in a coalition with you?
I actually think it's very difficult because the Koch brothers are also behind a lot of the voter suppression. They were the ones that they funded a lot.
So you would have a problem.
I would have a very hard time with it, and it's because I believe that their long-term strategy is actually to divide the Democratic progressive base by siphoning off certain voters, and it's not necessarily because they're so well-intentioned. For most folks, people would say that they're more libertarian than anything else, and all of a sudden they're like, wait, we're libertarian, but we don't understand what's happening in the White House. This is a completely dichotomy for them, and they're trying to pivot back.
Difference in opinion. For me, it's the RNC trying to intimidate other donors from having their own opinions. I wonder how other donors are going to react to that.
That's undemocratic, and most donors that I know aren't going to take advantage of that. They actually usually think that they're pretty smart. That's why they have money.
Well, in a lot of these candidates, they want his endorsement. They don't want him literally standing next to him, right? Like standing next to the president's side.
Hello, YouTubers. If you're watching this, it means you've checked out our channel, so thank you. Now do me a favor. Subscribe by clicking on that button down there. Click on any of the videos to watch the latest interviews and highlights from MTP Daily and MSNBC. You can get more Beat the Press content every morning in the First Read newsletter. If you're tired of content that you don't know anything about where it came from, you don't have to have that problem with us. NBC News, MSNBC, MTP, and the Meet the Press mindset right here for you on YouTube. Subscribe now.